It's a message that many of our young people and even children have studied in the past. I'll not take the time to read all of what's there, but take more of the time to make application to the lessons that are there. Open Doors is an agency that tracks persecution of believers in the world. And the most recent publication, Open Doors World Watch List 2024. And the worst of countries, reading the first several: North Korea, Somalia, Libya, Eritrea, Yemen, Nigeria, Pakistan, Sudan, Iran, Afghanistan, India, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the list goes down. China, number 19, Cuba, 22, Bangladesh, 26, Nicaragua, 30, and the list goes on and on. And the reality is, if you total what they offer on an annual basis, there are over 37 million in the top 50 countries alone who suffer very high or extreme levels of persecution because they believe in God. Needless to say, we are not a part of that group as Americans. We suffer embarrassment. We might face ridicule. Some might laugh at the things we believe, but none of us probably in this week and coming months even will be forced to die for the cause of our belief in God. We are a nation blessed in that way. I suppose the first question we need to ask before we look at Daniel's response is, what level of faith would we display if our lives were in danger? Now, we know in the first century the catacombs were occupied by those first century Christians. And they go into the catacombs and they find the sign of the fish. And they find other things carved into the walls of those catacombs. We know it was part of the first and second and third century. And the lion's den under the Medes and the Persians was their major way of bringing about death to those who had a belief system contrary to their own. Guillotines and hangings and shootings and other things maybe in other countries came to pass, but a lion's den was part of the culture in the during the time of the Medes and the Persians, and that's the study of Daniel 6. We saw in Daniel 5 that he was probably around 70 years old. And most historians would suggest by the history and the Medes and the Persians' history that Daniel is between 80 and 90 years old when you come to these events found in chapter 6. And like the other circumstances, Daniel was in a place of prominence. He was acknowledged to be someone who believed in God, and he had an inside track when visions and things occurred. Eventually, they would call him to receive the interpretation that was wanted in that circumstance. It didn't always happen as quickly as you might imagine, but again, as different people came to power and as he aged, and it wasn't like he lived in the castle, in the palace, but eventually they would come to remember that Daniel was a person who could meet their need as it related to this vision or this interpretation. We see in verse 4, Daniel 6, they tried to find grounds for charge against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." Now, it's important in making reference at the end that Daniel was faithful to himself and to his God. And the words given to us by the Holy Spirit is he was not put into a den of lions because of his bad behavior or because of his corruption, the words used here, or his negligence, or because he was untrustworthy. Scripture is very clear to tell us the character of this man of God in these early verses. And so the administrators, verse 6, and the satraps went as a group and encouraged him to offer or issue an edict. Send something out, and it's a new command, and it must be followed. And that edict is that anyone who prays to any god or any man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, we were told that they understood that we'll not find something at fault with him as far as his character. So we've got to look at something he believes, come up with some edict that would put him in a position of going against what he believes. And they came to the conclusion that he must pray to the king, not to any god, not to any other man, but only to the king. And so he put it into writing. It's amazing the pressure that groups of people can put on others. Very quickly, he regretted the edict when he saw the results and began to understand why he was pressured into giving this edict. But it's as if his mind was totally vacant of memory, totally unaware of Daniel and his character, totally not thinking that this edict is going to put him in a predicament that I don't want him to be in. And yet that's where we're headed. Something against the laws of God as it pertained to Daniel. Well, Daniel learned of the decree, and he went home to his upper room, verse 10. He opened the windows toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he went down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God. And the text tells us, just as he had done before. Nothing new. Done it for years. Done it every day for years. Done it 3 times a day for many years. The text is very clear to tell us this about Daniel. Great character, and this was something that was part of his daily exercise. And so these men went and found Daniel praying, in verse 11, and asking God for help. So again, doing what he always did, and telling us by inference that they knew where to go, they knew what they would find, and their plot had come true. Daniel was caught going against the edict which they had encouraged to be put forth to the public. And so they went to the king, and they spoke to him about this royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or man except to you, O king, will be thrown into the lion's den? And then he said, with great certainty implied, the decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be annulled. We've seen in other times in the Old Testament where something was said and it was made public and they could not go back on that word, even if they wanted to. Even if they'd been tricked, they could not go back on their word. And so they come to the king, hearing him affirm what was said and done through that edict. And he says, Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, paid no attention. He prayed 3 times a day. And when the king heard this, verse 14, he was greatly distressed, and he was determined to rescue Daniel and make every effort until sundown to save him. Deep regret. How can I undo this? What have I done to this man who was part of the administration, highly sought and highly appreciated? And he came to realize what had taken place. The king gave an order, because no decree, verse 15b, no decree or edict that the king issued can be changed. So it was set in stone, could not be changed, even though the person making it and the person in power wanted to make a change. And the king gave the order. They brought Daniel, threw him into the lion's den, and the king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. May your God rescue you. It was his hopeful desire that Daniel not die. And so the text sets it clearly as far as what's about to happen. A stone was brought, placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. What they just told us is the stone was put there and it was marked. It's similar to a wax seal that you sometimes see in movies. They melt some wax on a letter and put the signet ring into the wax. And if someone were to open that letter, the seal would be broken. Similar to the seal that goes on the back of an 18-wheeler trailer. When it's loaded and everything is invoiced, they seal it and it's not broken until it's delivered, and they see that it has not been opened, the seal not broken, and it's an affirmation that we've delivered what we promised to deliver. Well, that signet is the signal to us, if you will, that nothing changed as related to that stone rolled in front of the den's opening. They would see if the signet had been broken, so as to know they were kept inside. They will be inside, and we will know that. The king spent the night, verse 18, without eating, and without any entertainment being brought to him. He could not sleep. My human response in reading this many years ago, it serves you right. It serves you right. You should not have been able to sleep. And entertainment being brought to you would not have helped him at all, because he was not at all pleased with what would likely take place on that night. At the first light of dawn, the king got up, verse 19, and hurried to the lion's den. And this is probably where vacation Bible schools and elementary age teachers began to tell the story. The other, in quick form, a little more detail here. The king, and I can imagine the teachers having him rub his eyes as soon as the dawn, the sun begins to rise, in concern and wanting to see, and quickly going to determine exactly what took place. What did he hope would take place. Your God will deliver you. But whether he understood it, whether he believed it, he just knew that as far as I'm concerned, I hope your God intervenes in this. And of course, we remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego put into a fiery furnace. It was so hot that the people who put them in killed them. It was so hot, the temperature of that fiery furnace, if you will. So that was part of the heritage of the area, but different people, a different king, but certainly something that could have been known a few years later when this king was involved. And he called to Daniel in an anguished voice. What might that sound like? Daniel? That's more of a question. Oh, Daniel. Maybe a little bit more, I'm not sure. I'm not the actor to help you see it and appreciate what some of the elementary age teachers have done over the years. But we're told that it was an anguished voice as he was looking for and wondering exactly what happened. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? He wanted that to take place. Did it take place? And Daniel answered him. I appreciate the optimism in his words and the respect rendered to the king in this situation. It would seem to tell us that he understood the regrets that the king had in issuing this edict. It would tell us that he understood the king was not behind this fully and wanted something to occur to keep them from dying in the lion's den. Because his first response is, O king, live forever. And that's related, I think, to the king and not to the King of Kings. O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, God's sight. And that would point us back to the comment made that Daniel was a person wherein no corruption was found in him. He was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent, verse 4. He, by being spared, a declaration again of his innocence, very clearly given to us by God's Spirit to help us to come to an analysis of what's happening. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king. I think what that's telling us is if the king or his satraps or those who followed him in the administration, they made a decree, they offered an edict, but to break that edict was not wrong in God's sight. I did nothing wrong. I was innocent by not bowing down. We knew that this side of the cross. The circumstances given firsthand here would just be a statement to those who would be there. He's alive. It's a declaration of his innocence. He did nothing wrong by what? What was right? Not bowing down according to the edict. The king was overjoyed, gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wounds were found on him because he had trusted in God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in, they and their families were thrown into the lion's den. I think it's telling us that the king realized the ulterior motive of those who should have done something very different. If they had any clue of the history of Daniel and his innocence and his fellowship in these kingdoms, Babylon, the Medes, the Persians, it became very clear the king understood who was at fault and why it came about and how he had been suggested tricked. If that's the correct word, I think it was less tricking, it just didn't think it through. He didn't think it through of who in the kingdom might have no longer wanted to follow this decree. And the king, King Darius, wrote to all the peoples, nations, men of every language throughout the land, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." If you look at those two verses, he's speaking to the sovereignty of God. And it's my definition, which I think is mirrored here, God either allows or causes everything to occur upon this world, upon this earth. He causes it. He has that power. It's his right. He has that ability. And this is something that he brought about. But I think, in my mind, it's more of allowing things to run their natural course. So he caused Daniel's to be spared, but he many times allows nature to run its course, and yet he's still in control. It's part of the sovereignty of God. He either allows or causes everything. But it's my belief that more often than not, it's allowing things to go forward in their natural course. What do we learn? One of the things that comes up first and foremost, and it's overtly stated, we as Christians, if we're going to ever be faithful in the midst of deep persecution, if we're going to be faithful when the hardest moments come, it's because we've acted in a certain way. The message from Daniel 6 is, keep on being what you've been. And what does that say? If you've been weak-kneed, if you haven't been strong in your faith and stood up to the little things, when the big thing comes, you'll not be very successful. We need to be faithful over periods of time with little things in life, in our actions or lack of reaction to circumstances in our life. Keep on being what you've been. And what is that? Patient, kind, gentle toward those that we would disagree with. What does it mean when what we've been? Looking for an open window, just a crack, to perhaps share with them why we believe what we believe, why we are who we are. If we don't do that month and year by year, when the big time comes, when we must speak up and stand up, more than likely we will not, if we don't have a heritage of doing it along the way. What do we know of Daniel? What were we told? Every day, 3 times a day, he prayed toward Jerusalem. Every day. If it's true, and we believe he was in his early teens in Daniel chapter 1, And we know that he's 80 and maybe even as old as 90 here. How many days does that represent? Those of you who are mathematicians, 80 times what? 72, 75, 74 times 365 times 3. Now, if certain people I know were here, they would already give me the number. He's done it his whole life. Every day, every decade, every moment in that apartment, if you will, thinking, revering God, the God of heaven and earth. So is it any surprise that he's not about to do something different because somebody said to? Not a surprise at all. Keep on being what you've been. And we know that he was faithful. No negligence or corruption was to be found in him. He was distinguished. He was the person of God in that circumstance. But being the person that he was, it also tells us that he needs to continue, not being just that person, but doing what he did to be that person of God. And it ought not to be a surprise at all that he was that person on that time. The final point, keep on trusting whom you've trusted. Why would he think on this occasion, when his faith was being tested, that God would turn his back on him now? He had not, since he had gone in as a talented young Jewish boy into this enemy's camp. Why would he turn his back on God now? And he would remember the blessings he had received and the challenges he had responded to. And Shadrach and Meshach and the response that God gave them in rescuing them from this fiery furnace. Keep trusting the one you've trusted. I read a story. I think it's interesting in what it can teach us. Several years ago, a Nashville newspaper carried a story about a woman named Ms. Lila Craig. And it was known of her by her neighbors that she attended worship over 1,040 Sundays. And she was in her 80s at the time the article was written. And the observation was made that it makes one wonder, what's the matter with Miss Craig? Doesn't she ever have unexpected company? Now, to our shame, that implied that we can be in worship unless company comes and we've got to stay home. Please don't be that kind of person. Has it that she's never gone anywhere on Saturday night so that she's too tired to attend morning worship the next day? Implying that sometimes it's late and we don't get up and come to worship because we were up late on Saturday night. The article wrote, doesn't she ever beg off to attend picnics or family reunions or have headaches or colds or nervous spells or just tired feelings? Do those things never occur to her? To attend 1,040 straight Sundays in worship? And watch the implication. We sometimes let those things happen in our life. Doesn't she ever oversleep? Doesn't she ever want time to read the Sunday newspaper? Well, now we go online. Hasn't she ever become angry at the minister? Well, that can't ever happen, right? Has she never had her feelings hurt by someone and felt justified in staying home just as we would suggest here, the article, listen to a sermon on the radio or watch it on TV or hear worship online and stay home? What's the matter with Miss Craig anyway? I suggest to you, the article concluded, Miss Craig was doing the same thing Daniel was doing when they called for the lions. Being what she'd always been, doing what she'd always done, trusting whom she had always trusted. Consistently following through with her actions matching her belief in who God is for her life. What about us? What about us? I made a statement a number of years ago in South Florida that it was concerning to me because one of the members earlier, they moved away, and I didn't mention names, but one of our members on one occasion had looked so forward to finally getting their family members to visit so they could invite them to West Broward to worship with her, and perhaps something would happen and she would suddenly be interested, our family would suddenly be interested again. They'd been unfaithful for a period of time, never worshiped in recent years. And so she had been prayerful and could not wait till her family members came so she could bring them to worship at the West Broward congregation and perhaps touch their heart in some way to bring about previous behavior toward the church. And then as the week approached, and she told me later, and she regretted it, she realized, what if they won't come? And her first thought was, well, I'll go. Of course, I won't miss if they won't come with me. And then after a period of time, she thought, but who's going to fix lunch? What are we going to eat for lunch? And she finally decided she needed to stay home and fix lunch, and did not come, taking advantage of something that she had been praying for many, many, many years, to maybe bring them to worship and touch their heart in some way. When she shared it with me, I said, hey, there's thousands of restaurants in South Florida. Tell them you'll be home at 12:10. I'll quit early if I need to and go out to eat. And she just looked at me as if I hadn't even thought about that. And I said, or tell them, I put some food out for you, you go ahead and eat, and when I get home, I'll fix something for me. Saying, without saying it, what's your priority? What made that meal so important that you missed that prayerful opportunity to have an influence for good to your family members? And she deeply regretted it after the fact when they had gone home. Do what you've always done. Be who you've always been. Trust in the God that you trust in so many times when maybe the decisions aren't so difficult and the way is very clear and you've been easily able to do what you would choose to do. It makes it easier when those moments come if you've lived that way. Well, if you have company coming in a few Sunday mornings, I've just given you encouragement of how to proceed if you've chosen to listen. If there's things you can do, things you can say, things you need prayed over, or if you want to follow what Sadie did this morning and be immersed in water in order to have sins forgiven, we stand and we sing a song of encouragement.
I hear the Savior say, thy spirit in me is small, Child of weakness, watch and pray. Find in me thine all in all. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. And when before the throne I stand in him complete, I'll lay my trophies down, all down at Jesus' feet. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow.
Thank you, Brother Gary. You've done very well today, as always. Thank you to hear you speak to us. Does anyone have anything they'd like to tell us before we're dismissed? We are going in the back to sing. If any of you would like to come, we'd love to have you. If there's nothing else, let's bow. We're dismissed.
Gracious Heavenly Father, we are so grateful to be here in your presence, Lord. Honor you with song and praise. Hear another portion of your word. We ask you to give us understanding, a lesson that we may know how to live our lives better according to your will. Thank you for Gary and the lessons he brought and all those who served today. And also, Lord, we're very glad to see Sadie baptized today. And I pray for her faith to grow every day. I pray you strengthen our faith. And knowing that we are forgiven when we fail, and we know that we have that through our Savior, Christ Jesus. Thank you for your loving kindness, for your mercy and grace. I pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.